Today I want to show you guys the basics of photo composing and show you guys the most important tools that you have to keep in mind. Obviously, this is my personal preference, so other artists might have a different workflow and use different tools, but I just hope you can learn a thing or two from this video, and let's get started. I have this background and I will use my dog Shula as the model. I've already edited both of these images a little bit so I can start right away. What I want to do is I want to take Shula and put her in this background. So how we start is we go to the select button up here and we click on a subject, so the AI will try to select the subject in the image, which it did a very good job of. It selected Shula very well, but as you can see the selection is not quite perfect, and if I add a layer mask you can see that the edges are also a bit choppy, so I certainly don't want to leave it like that. So before we mask it out, I will press on this selection tool, the lasso tool, and it gives me the option to select and mask. And now you see everything is red in the image, but the red parts are the parts that are not selected, and the regular part is the part that is selected. So I want to make the selection a little bit more fine and more organic. So I click on the Refine Edge tool and I will just use this soft round brush and I go along the edges just like that, and you can see the edges are already looking a lot better. You can see that again when I select the ear. The edges look a lot better. Of course, we have a few areas that are not selected and that we have to correct later, but we will worry about that in a moment. So right now I will just go around the edge with this tool completely and then we will see. So now we have refined the edges on the entire subject, but as I said before, we have some areas that are not very well selected. So what we do is now we go in with the brush tool and we also click on this plus because we want to add those areas to the selection. And now I will just paint over the areas that haven't been correctly selected, just like so. And if you want to be very precise, you can just use a graphic tablet if you have one. I'm just using my mouse. It works just fine, so you don't have to spend money on that. And I'm just refining the selection. So now that my subject is selected, I click on OK. And you can see the selection in the dotted line. And what I do now is I will mask it out, which means I click on this button and automatically you can see that the background has disappeared. And if you look at the mask, you can see that the background is shown in black and the dog is shown in white. So what that means is if you use a mask, everything that you paint black will disappear and everything that you paint white will be visible. So why I am using this mask is that I still want to preserve the background in case I might have to use it. I can always delete it later on, so I'm not gonna do it right now. But I can show you if I use a brush and use a black color to paint on it, Shula disappears. And if I use a white color to paint on it, I can recreate the background that is still underneath the mask. So that's why I don't want to delete it just yet, in case I might have to use it. I won't in this case, but this is what I normally do so I don't stand in the way of my process basically. So now that we are done with this part, I will just use the move tool and move this layer over into the image. Now you can see Shula is on this background and it looks pretty okay, I think. But I think she's a very big and I want to scale her down just a little bit. And also, if I zoom into her paws, you can see that they're blurry because I used a very small aperture to photograph this image and the background is very sharp. So we will have to adjust that as well so it looks realistic. So now we want to size her down first. And to do that, I click on Control and T, and that opens up this frame, and it allows you to scale up or scale down your image. And be sure to click on this, because if you don't, you can see we don't keep the proportions, but we do want to keep the proportions, so we have to activate this. Now I'm scaling her down. And I'm just playing around a little bit and see what size I'm looking for. I want her to be in the center of this pier. So now that I'm done, I can just click OK. And there I have it, Shula on this background. And as said before, we have to match the background because it just doesn't look realistic when her feet are blurry when the bridge is completely in focus. So I will right click and duplicate this layer because I want to have a backup in case I screw up. And what I do now is I go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and I select Tilt Shift. Tilt Shift is a blur tool that allows you to create more depth, and how it works is basically that within these two lines everything will stay sharp, and beyond these dotted lines everything will be completely blurry, and this area is basically the transition area. Since Shula came from a very blurry image, I will have to crank up the blur quite a bit. I think maybe 50 pixels will be enough. And now I have to adjust the location of this blur. So because of the focus on her eyes, the focus point will be slightly in front of her feet. So I will move this up to just slightly in front of her feet where her head would be hovering above. And then I will limit the completely in focus area to only this part because her feet here are already starting to be blurry. So now I will adjust the other lines. I think that from the horizon up everything would be completely blurred, but not here on the pier because it's closer to us, and I think that's why I'm dragging this part down so it never reaches the 50 pixel blur. And I think this looks very natural to me, so I'm keeping it like this. I can still come back and adjust it if I don't like it because I do have my backup layer. So I'm moving it up, moving it down a little bit because I can see that her feet are still more blurry than the bridge. So there, I think this is looking nice. And if you're done and satisfied with the outcome, just click OK. And there we go, we have the blurry background. Obviously, with a beautiful image like this, I wouldn't prefer to blur it, but just to match this photo of Shula, we just have to. This is not going to be a beautiful image in the end, it's just for demonstration purposes, so you guys can see how I add two images together. So now we can still see a difference in color between Shula and the background, although the images do match very well, but I still want to adjust the colors. So what I'm doing is I will add an adjustment layer. I can go right here and click on curves. I have a tutorial on curves, so if you don't know how to use them, feel free to check that out. What I'm seeing is that the background is very bright and the bridge is also very bright, but Shula is just a tad too dark for me, so I'm pulling the brightness up just a little bit to match the setting better. And I will want to preserve, oh, hold on, this is my mistake. Before I do that, I want to make sure that this adjustment layer only affects my subject, but not my background. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on this layer, and then I'm clicking on Alt, and then just a left mouse click, and that will clip this adjustment layer to the layer below, which is the layer of my subject. And now, whatever I do, it will only affect my subject, but not the background, which is exactly what I want. So I'm increasing the brightness a little bit so it fits a bit better. And then I'm taking the shadows down just a tad so they're not just too bright. And you can see, I think it already matches the background a bit better. Thanks to this adjustment, I will also increase the blue areas in the shadows because this image is very cool. And I will decrease the reds a little bit. So I think this works very well. You can see the difference. And now I want to fine tune the colors a little bit. So I want an adjustment layer, and I click on color balance. Because I already have a clip layer, I added this layer beneath, so it's automatically clipped to my subject. And now I want to increase the blues in the midtones because this image is very blue, just maybe 1 or 2. And also use a bit more cyan because of the look of the background. So I think this looks great. It's just slight alterations, but they make a difference in the long run. So as you can see, I don't know if you can see, but she looks a bit more blue than before. And now what's missing is she needs a shadow because now it just looks like she's floating over the pier. And how we do that is we simply add a new layer beneath the layer of the subject. And what I like to do is I will use the eyedropper tool and just pick a color from any dark area in the image, like this. And then I pick a brush tool and use a soft round brush, increase the size a little bit, and I just use this brush with decreased opacity to create a shadow underneath her. I just basically paint it in. So the light is coming from behind mostly, so the shadow would drag a bit to the front, and I will just add the shadow like so. I'm not using a tablet or anything, so you can perfectly do that with your mouse. Now, I think this is actually enough already because it's a cloudy image, so it wouldn't cast a very hard shadow. Now I'm just using a bigger brush and decrease the opacity a bit more and feather the whole thing out a little bit. And also I want to add a bit more darkness to where her paws actually touch the pier. So now I increased the opacity again and just paint it in so that looks a lot more realistic. And I can see that the selection wasn't perfect here, so I can use the black brush to remove the areas that I don't want, which is this little thing here, and also these little stones that were in the previous image. So now it looks like Shula is actually standing on this pier, and I think it's looking really good, but I'm still a little bit bothered by the dark outline on her. And how you can fix it is pretty easy. You just add a new layer. You click on your subject, click on new layer, and because it's beneath the clipping masks, it will also create a clipping mask from this layer. And then we use a bright color, which we can pick with the eyedropper tool. And we just pick any bright color on her, like so. And with a soft round brush, I will just paint over the dark areas so the darkness will disappear. And you can see it looks very organic now, like the light is actually coming from behind. Just do it very carefully. I'm not actually brushing on her, I'm just brushing next to her, and because it's a soft round brush, it will still appear on the subject, like so. I will do the same thing right here, and also a little bit here. And there you have it. Look at the difference. The dark outline is completely gone. And what I still want to do is, I think because the light is coming from behind, these areas should be a bit darker because her body is shielding the light from these areas. And I will just add another layer just underneath all that, and I will set it to overlay. And if you have watched my tutorial on dodge and burn, you will know what this is about. And if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to do that because I don't want to go into too much detail about dodging and burning. But basically, I'm setting this layer mode to overlay. I'm picking again a color from the background to use as my shadow color. And then I'm painting over these areas with a soft round brush just to increase the opacity. And I'm painting over just to make it appear darker. Like you can see, this works very well. I can already increase the shadows here, and the paws look a lot darker than they did before. And these areas should also be darker, so should her face be, because the sun is coming from behind. You will have to get a feel for that, where the light comes from and where the light should be casted on the subject, but I think with a bit of practice you would get the hang of it. And now after we added some shadows, I would add a bit more highlights with the same method. I just pick a bright color with the eyedropper tool, the color I used before, and I will use a soft round brush again and paint on the same overlay layer and paint in where the highlights would be. So they would be everywhere where the light would hit from behind, on all of the edges, also on the inside of the legs because the light shines through that. And if I see that I've missed an area that should have been dark, I will paint it in with the dark color from before. So there you go. This is the finished product. I think, of course, I could have done a more detailed and better job, but I think you get how the basics work. You can always, work on the colors and also the edges and the shadows a little bit more and refine the image, but I think the basic tools are explained here, and I hope I haven't been too confusing. So with that, thanks for watching, and I'm looking forward to see your results.